Europe's handing over its sovereignty to Silicon Valley and China. That's stark warning this week from none other than Germany's chancellor. The information age we live in means it's no longer about who makes steel or controls oil, but who's got your data. Angela Merkel's got reason to worry. Companies like Volkswagen, her own interior ministry, they store their information on cloud computing systems run by the likes of Microsoft and Amazon. In the long run, could that be a national security risk? What if, for instance, current trade tensions take a turn for the worse? Merkel says Germany and France are building the Gaia X project to develop a European cloud computing giant. How soon? The EU says it doesn't have time to wait for tech titans to spring up from tiny startups. All hope is not lost, though, say participants at the GovTech Summit, which brings to Paris businesses small and large alongside the public sector. 3 of those participants are with us today. We're going to be asking for their perspective on how to take on the giants who, well, effectively own the internet today. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the battle for our data. And with us, Marie-Barbe Girard. She's the former advisor to ex-French President François Hollande and the co-author of the report on GovTech in France. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you.
Want to welcome as well Mathieu Noé. He's the CEO and founder of Manti. In one word, what's Manti?
We help public administrations make better decisions with data.
With data and software and...
Yeah, we plugged onto every single data sources within, for example, a city hall, centralize everything, and then give access to dashboards and visual analytics to public officials and elected officials.
We're going to pick up on that point in just a moment when we look at the news cycle this Thursday. Johnny Hugel is head of research at the Capital Risk Fund Public. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you very much.
And he teaches information warfare at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Fabrice Epelbois, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, foreign delegates attending that GovTech Summit got a chance to see France play to stereotypes a little bit this Thursday. Healthcare workers staging a massive strike across a country where a growing population's aging, but over the decades, the state's been cutting the numbers of doctors, nurses, and hospital beds. I said I'd come back to you, Mathieu Noé, because is this one of those typical cases where instead of cutting doctors and nurses, the cuts could have come elsewhere, or should I put it, the savings could have come elsewhere?
To be honest with you, I don't know very much about the healthcare system in France. I know more about local administrations, but I'm pretty sure some companies are working on the issue. For example, we've got Doctolib, which is a very good example of GovTech, and they've started working with the hospitals in Paris to save money.
Doctolib is this program that makes people sign in, and when they have a doctor's appointment, they get a reminder.
Yeah.
And apparently there's 8% fewer missed appointments.
Exactly. And they've started working with the APHP, so Hospitals of Paris, to, well, make them save money on appointments, ensure that more people are coming into the appointments. It's usually very long to see a specialist, and Doctolib is ensuring that, well, when you set up an appointment, you actually show up. So this is the sort of innovation that might be able to just save money for the APHP.
Marie-Barbe Girard, is this an example of what GovTech is all about?
One of many examples. And actually, you mentioned the healthcare system. We mentioned this morning when we launched the report, at least a handful of these companies were saving time for hospital staff. There's Doctolib is about making appointments. You've got a company, Lifen, who started a securized message network between hospitals and doctors that saves hours, 300,000 time of consultation per year. There's another company called Ambler, which is digitalizing the booking of health transport for patients to go to hospital or from hospital, and it's saving 20 minutes per transport booking, and they've reduced costs, and they're basically opening up time for staff that we know are very, very short of time today.
Staff that are short of time, making everything more efficient, and we've had the Yellow Vest movement in this country over the past years. Is the whole of the country, shall we say, on the grid as much as it should be to allow everyone to benefit from these savings?
I think hospitals definitely have access to the tools that they need to make better, to manage their time better. So we're talking, relationships typically between hospitals and transporters. We're talking relationships between hospitals and doctors. Everyone has the tools, and it's a shame not to use it. And what we're finding is that there are markets that are completely under-optimal today.
Like?
Technology, like health, is one of them. In local administration, there's a few as well. In education, we can see how technology can disrupt these markets and provide massive efficiencies.
Disrupt for you is a positive term.
In a positive way.
In a positive
Disrupt
way.
in a positive way, for the public good.
A reaction, Fabrice
Well,
Epelboin?
it depends. If you're disrupting something, you're on the good side, and disruption is really cool. If you're being disrupted, like Western democracies with Facebook, for example, I'm not sure.
Which we'll talk about later.
I'm not sure disruption is that cool. It really depends on which side you are.
And Johnny Hugo, let me ask you, how's France doing? And how tech savvy, or should we say how integrated is France when you compare to its neighbors when it comes to the public sector and the private sector working together to, shorten the lines, make things a little more efficient?
I think it's come a long way in a kind of pretty short space of time.
That's diplomatic speak.
Yeah, exactly. We found in our study that the market's currently worth about 16 billion euros, which we think is the biggest in Europe. We found some of the companies mentioned today have really raised significant investment. We've seen a sort of, I think, appetite for the first time that French GovTech, as part of a sort of French tech movement, is becoming attractive and is kind of finally being put on the map. It is worth putting this stuff in perspective, though. It's still a long way behind America. And
I was going to say,
because
and I'm sure Mathieu knows that there's a lot of French spoken in the Silicon Valley. People, when they get good, they get poached by the Americans.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think, the market is probably 30 times smaller than in America. I think that's why it's really important that we see this as a European rather than solely a French endeavor, right? If European tech is going to succeed and French tech is going to succeed, for now, British tech is going to succeed. I think we have to see this as an integrated European project and see this as kind of us. Probably can't compete with the Americans and the Chinese on our own. But as an integrated tech sector, maybe we can.
All right, let's talk about that now. On Tuesday, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel warning an employers' conference in Berlin that, quote, so many companies have just outsourced all their data to U.S. companies. She added that she's not saying it's bad in and of itself. She just means that the value-added products that come out of that with the help of artificial intelligence will create dependencies that I'm not sure are good. At that very same conference, her economy minister, Peter Altmaier, said, we want to be able to offer companies, ministries and governments the chance to store their data in Europe according to transparent, clearly recognizable standards. Fabrice Epelboin, Germany's Interior Ministry, which stores private data as well as all the whatever public data there is of citizens on servers that are owned by U.S. companies.
Yeah, we're there.
And France is the same.
Exactly the same. We tried to have a sovereign cloud system in France something like 5 years ago, even a little more, and we spent hundreds of millions of dollars into this. It was purely nonsense, totally nonsense. As of today, we still don't have any European massive cloud actor. We could
on Tuesday, the Germans touted this Gaia X system. They say the French are on board as well.
We did that again and again, and it was a massive failure every
Why?
time. That's a very good question. Nobody really knows why, and we just keep on doing the same mistake without really thinking about the previous mistake, without even speaking about the previous mistake, without even taking into account that there's something named the Cloud Act, meaning that whatever data we store in Europe, if it's in an American company, it doesn't change anything. We could store it in the United States. Legally, it belongs to the United States.
Marie-Barbe Girard, the revelations of Edward Snowden a few years ago reminded us that those tech companies, whether they actively agree or not, are still having that data pumped by the United States intelligence services. What was it, 2 decades ago that Jacques Chirac was talking about how, when he was president, that the late Jacques Chirac, that we had to have a European competitor to Google. Now we're talking about a European cloud computing giant. It's not happened yet. Why?
Because I think we're not very good at buying from our startups and from our companies and our tech companies. And I think the state, government generally, needs to realize that one way to support them, it's not all about, providing funding or providing visa. This is important, but they need to be a good client. And typically this morning, there's a company called, Macron was using a lot Telegram and WhatsApp, and everyone in government. Not very safe, right? For very confidential conversations. So there's a company in France who has launched a securized message system that is now used by all the civil servants in France. And this is exactly the kind of things that we need to do. We need to start promoting our own players and being a good client to the French tech and European tech.
It's amazing what you're saying, because globalization, a few years ago, we thought we'd all be speaking the same language and everything. And now you're saying there are these new barriers coming up. Europe has to have its own secure network, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
What's happened?
Why? I mean, why is this happening? I don't know. I think it's
Edward Snowden, maybe?
Yes.
Maybe the French government is starting to realize that what Edward Snowden told us 5 years ago is reality, and it took 5 years to react. There's a major problem in terms of realizing the obvious for French politics. I mean, we knew about what Edward Snowden told us before Edward Snowden, but at the time it was labeled as a conspiracy theory. Now we have proofs.
Yeah.
And we've been having proof for 5 years. We haven't been doing anything about that. We're still storing very sensitive data on American clouds. We're still using all over the place WhatsApp, and Telegram. It's amazing. We're talking about the head of state. He's using WhatsApp and Telegram. What can you expect from a country where the head of state is doing this?
Mathieu Noé, where does Menti put its data on the cloud?
Well, we use a French provider called OVH, so it's a French, let's say, French-owned data.
With some massive American capital
Yes.
in trade, so it's not really sovereign.
I think that one of the main issues here is obviously scale, and as you've said, well, we don't have any European giants because, well, we don't have any European companies, and we still think in terms of national markets. And I think, well, if we were thinking in terms of European markets and every single company started as a European company from day one, we might actually reach the necessary scale to compete with the American or to compete with
Okay, so
Microsoft.
this is the question, right? Because you have some of these US tech giants, which began as a startup in some geeky kid's garage, and that grew and grew and grew. Others, because like IBM, they hit the jackpot because they got a Defense Department contract way back when. How do you have European giants with things like Airbus? What is it going to take? Is it going to be a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach that will build this European tech giant that we're looking for?
Well, Airbus is the perfect example of the top-down approach. Several governments coming together and saying, okay, we're going to start this amazing aerospace company. But I think it's currently, and public is actually building this European ecosystem that, well, we need funding. Should we look in France or should we look in Europe? Well, at the moment, we're still looking in France, and we talk to German VC, we talk to Danish VC, we talk to English VC, and they're, well, tell us when you go international, okay? Just now focus on France. And if we were talking to German VC and they would just consider us just like they would consider another German company, well, that would mean a whole lot for startup in Europe.
Johnny, you at Public, which is, again, a reminder, it's a capital risk fund. Do people get up in the morning and look at the map of Europe, or they look at maps of individual nations? How does it work?
I think we do see Europe as an integrated startup and venture capital ecosystem. And that means that we look at where companies can scale across different countries, and companies that are relevant in France might be relevant in Germany, but also in Poland and Spain. And I think we see this as a really sort of European-wide problem. Regarding cloud, I think what's quite interesting is that all of these major cloud providers that we're talking about, which is broadly AWS, Microsoft, Oracle, they aren't really cloud provider. Well, they are enormous tech companies that have become cloud providers, not out of speciality, but because of the scale of their operations, right? And what's quite interesting is that maybe the reason we don't have a European giant cloud provider is because we don't have a European giant technology company, right? So what we then have to think about is there a way we can build a European giant cloud provider without it being simply a European giant technology company that pivots to providing cloud services?
Are there potential technology giants?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They used to be. Talking about cloud, OVH used to be a European giant, set up by a Polish migrant in France. It was a great success story. The problem is, when the French state decided to have its own cloud giant, it gave hundreds of millions to Orange, a French telco, another few hundreds of millions to SFR, another French telco, and totally forgot about OVH. So OVH went to the United States to find some capital. And they found, I think, 400 million. So as of today, it's no longer a European tech giant because the politics have invested in the wrong place.
Johnny Hugo?
Let me be a bit more positive about European tech giants. I think we already have some, and we already have some sectors where I think Europe probably will lead. Fintech is probably the most obvious one, and is probably the most important future tech sector, right? If you think of almost all of the biggest fintech companies, TransferWise, Revolut, Starling Bank, N26, these are usually, UK companies, Nordic companies. It's quite striking that the kind of list of the top 10 biggest fintech companies are basically all European, with the exception of Stripe, which is actually an Irish-founded company anyway. So what we have to think about, I think, again, is why did Europe get the advantage there? And the reason I think Europe got the advantage there is that we have a well-regulated, a highly consolidated and integrated financial services market. It's probably easier for technology companies to scale across those countries than it is in America. We were kind of regulated well and in a kind of forward-thinking way from the beginning. Let's do it again in a new sector.
You said the R word, regulation. It's very important at this time, and the whole world is watching what Europe does on that score. We'll talk about it when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. And on the sidelines of a GovTech summit that brings together public and private sector, we're looking at whether Europe can stand on its own 2 feet between China on the one hand and the United States on the other when it comes to the tech sector. We're talking about with Marie-Barbe Girard, former advisor to ex-French President François Hollande, co-author of a report on GovTech here in France. Mathieu Noé, CEO and founder of Menti. Again, describe Menti for us.
Well, we help local administrations make better decisions with data. So we plugged onto every single data sources within a city hall, centralize everything, and then give access to public servants and elected officials to dashboards, visualization, charts, so that they can make better decisions.
So if you make it easier, for instance, to go on the taxman's website?
Not for citizens, for public servants. So for example, it will be easier for them to follow their budgets, follow how many people they are employing, what is the frequentation of municipal activities, things like that.
All right. Johnny Hugo, head of research at Capital Risk Fund Public, is with us as well. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Fabrice Appelbois, who teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Before the break, we were talking about how the rest of the world's going to be looking over the years to come at France when it comes to regulation. Already, there are those rules when it comes to data when you click on websites that were put in place last year. And speaking of public and private sector, you might say that France's nominee for Internal Market Commissioner is a poster child in any way of that public-private sector partnership. He's had stints as finance minister, but also boss of France Telecom, and most recently, chief executive at technology group Atos. Thierry Breton, when asked by lawmakers how he sees his job, talked up the notion of Europe's digital transformation.
We will send a strong signal that in Europe, we've taken full measures, that we've understood the difficulty that we're facing, and we've given ourselves the means to tackle the challenges of the digital transition. A single policy-making structure that will respond to everything that brings changes to the entire chain of our activities, our industry, and our lives.
It's kind of interesting, Marie-Barbe Girard, because a lot of people don't quite understand what this giant portfolio that Emmanuel Macron asked for his commission at the new EU Commission in Brussels was about. It sounds like that could be the most important part of the job.
Absolutely, absolutely. I actually think data is going to play a massive role in the build-up of European giants. We have our own definition of data privacy, what that means for us. It's completely different to what the Chinese think about, how they consider data. It's completely different to how the Americans consider data. And we're leading the way on data regulation. And this could be key to the emergence of European tech giants.
Lawmakers approving his nomination, so he is going to be the new internal market commissioner. And he promised it'll be a one-stop shop where they'll deal with all this policy. Can he do it?
I think so.
You agree, Fabrice Pellemont?
Well, we have a really interesting piece of legislation with GDPR. It needs to be tested, and it will be tested soon. There is
Tested how?
Currently unfolding. There's a big potential scandal with most French websites taking privacy data and giving it to a third party, namely Criteo and companies like that. And obviously, the way it has been built is totally illegal. So we're facing.
So there are loopholes right now.
There is. So far it isn't a legal loophole. It's a technical loophole, and as of today, most French websites are totally legal in terms of GDPR. So either there will be something.
But what do you think of this big portfolio that he's got? Is this you were saying how you get the sense, you told us in part one, you get the sense that France's government finally gets how it's an issue of sovereignty, this issue of who controls your data. Do you think they get it with this giant portfolio that's been given to Thierry Breton?
I think the first thing to look at is failure. We've been failing once on building a huge client giant. It's been a failure. Nobody really looked at the failure and understand and learn something from this failure. We've been building with the German more than 10 years ago a European search engine. It was a failure. We've been doing another one. It looks like another failure. And nobody is looking at those failures and learning from them. So we are definitely going to do other failures.
But again, Thierry Breton's job, I'm asking about that because you heard just before the break, Johnny Hugo saying people are going to be looking to Europe to see how they regulate the issues of data. Is he going to be the one to police
Well,
it?
there's a great test coming up, and we'll have our answer within a few months, because there is a major problem in terms of GDPR right now in France. Either the law will apply, or all this will just collapse.
This new portfolio, what do you make of it?
My view is that this is going to be a European Commission-wide challenge. It's going to require the kind of real concentration and dedication from a number of different people, from the digital secretary of each of these respective countries to a number of different portfolios across the European Commission. Because again, this is relevant to innovation, to markets, to technology, to outcomes for citizens. This isn't just kind of unique to this one niche area.
To this one niche area. And the UK, if Brexit does happen, will they follow along?
Who knows? I mean, that's a pretty complex set of considerations we have about what our sort of regulatory alignment will look like. I think most people agree that, in general, regulatory alignment with the EU is a good thing, because as we've all agreed, there tend to be strong, proactive regulators, and we will kind of maybe suffer from a bit of an isolation problem if we're not part of the EU. As we've seen with GDPR, it is enforceable even to American tech giants, which we've seen. It's not clear how enforceable UK regulation is going to be on an international stage without the support of France and Germany and other actors.
Mathieu Noé, if you're the head of a small company like yours, what kind of protection are you looking for from the Americans, from the Chinese?
Not sure if I'm looking for protection, but
what kind of regulation is the right amount?
I think the European framework is the one that reflects best our way of life, if there is such a thing. But as Marie-Barbe said, Chinese see data a certain way, Americans see it another way, while Europeans need to define their own way of seeing data. And so GDPR is what is currently the most advanced data regulation maybe in the world. And I think this is pretty good protection. I think this is a pretty good framework, and we're not having any trouble operating within that framework as a startup that works with sensitive data coming from the public sector.
It's the strongest data protection rules in the world, but you heard Fabrice Appelboin say it's not strong enough. What does that tell you?
I'm saying it needs to be tested. It's pretty strong. The law actually is pretty strong. It needs to be tested. The rule of law must be made. So far, it's not the case.
It needs to be enforced. We need to show that we're serious about it.
How do you enforce it?
There's cases that have come to the, I can't remember how it's
Let's
called,
say SNCF,
the
for example,
enforcement authority. We need to go through, follow through what we've said. We've set principles, pretty strong principles. We led the way on this. Now we need to make sure they're enforced and they're followed by everyone who's acting in
But we're
Europe.
at the right time. Right now, there's a major case that will test this law.
My view on enforcement is that you make it as easy as possible, right? And you make it as easy as possible to comply with the law. So that means, providing the right guides and tools that everyone knows they are complying with GDPR, kind of removing all grey areas as much as you can. Good regulation is about enforcement, and it's about having a heavy hand, but it's also about empowering private sector actors and public sector actors to properly comply.
Yeah, because, it's all so new. It's only been, 10, 20 years that we've had this. Really 5 years when you look at the way things are going. It changes so fast, and it's all so new that we are writing those regulations as we go along. And it's become really a campaign issue in the United States, where they're going to have a presidential election soon. The outsized influence of Silicon Valley made a campaign issue by some Democrats running for president. Last month, Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg went to Congress to convince lawmakers that his company, which already controls the data of all those who use not just Facebook, but also Instagram and WhatsApp, should also be entrusted to run a cryptocurrency, Libra.
People pay far too high a cost and have to wait far too long to send money home to their families abroad. The current system is failing them. The financial industry is stagnant, and there is no digital financial architecture to support the innovation that we need. I believe that this problem can be solved, and Libra can help.
You hear that, Marie-Barbe Girard? His view is that, central banks and all that, they're not efficient. We can do a better job.
Yeah. I don't buy it. Ambitious on their part, but I don't buy it. I think what is important, though, is we were talking about, the role of the European Commission. The European Commission has managed to get Facebook to accept that they can't share data between Facebook and WhatsApp, and that's already one big success. I think further we need to find new ways to regulate how Facebook uses the data and all the advertising that goes on the platform. What Mark Zuckerberg, where I agree with him, is that he says he can't do it all by himself. You can ask him to self-patrol, which I think is a very fair argument. He's not the right person to do it. I think it falls on us to to regulate this market, and we need to. If the US won't do it,
who's us?
I think Europe should lead the way.
Fabrice Appelboin?
Do you think Europe could dismantle Facebook? Because this is definitely the thing to do. And I'm afraid we don't have this kind of power. I'm afraid, obviously, if you look at what Facebook has done to democracies, and now they want to head to the financial sector, what could go wrong? This is really crazy. We know for a fact that Facebook has been used to destroy democracies. We have this guy who now wants to set up a new currency, and obviously, nothing much is happening. Thanks God the Americans are stopping him, but nothing much is happening toward Facebook. We, in France, like in many other European countries, have upcoming elections. We're not doing anything about that. Facebook announced yesterday that they have destroyed 5 billion fake accounts. That's twice their real account. So there is a major, major problem. And we're not talking about just fake news. Fake news is just the tip of the iceberg. This thing is totally disrupting our societies. And we're not doing anything.
Well, we saw in 2016 that there was data mining in the run-up to the Brexit referendum so that you could micro-target, not so much the purveying of fake news, but simply the sharing of people's personal data so you know who to target. Is it any different as we head towards a general election now in the UK?
On that particular case, I think we need to be a bit more cautious because it's difficult to directly prove the kind of influence of these kinds of things on voting outcomes. People have been doing targeted voting advertising in lots
But there
of
was the
different forms for
Cambridge
a number of years.
Analytica
No, and
scandal,
that I totally agree. Those,
where third parties were given all this data from people.
There
My-
were
I
some
think-
sociological studies from Facebook, within Facebook, something like 7 years ago, that proved for a fact that there is an influence and that Facebook is able to influence your mood. And that was Facebook internal studies.
Yeah, totally.
Now we have Cambridge Analytica telling us that Facebook and many others, like Steve Bannon or Peter Thiel, Palantir, has been setting up a huge disinformation campaign in order to have not only Brexit, but also President Trump, and in another way, very different way, Bolsonaro. And you're asking for proof? Are we
Again,
serious?
what I'd say is there needs to be a stronger correlation proven between moods and
You're
voting
asking for
outcomes.
yet another
But
country that
I guess
fails?
my broader point, which is less controversial, is I think we need to be careful to make sure that because this is in a political context, that we don't kind of make regulatory decisions that we otherwise wouldn't make. So, for instance, dismantling or breaking up a technology company, which we don't normally do.
We're not
I think
able
we need
to
to
do
be
that.
careful to think about that. Right, is all I'd say.
Mathieu Noé, when I get off air, we're going to be putting the show up on Facebook. We're going to be perhaps putting pictures up on Instagram. We're using U.S. social media to advertise our show. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm probably less knowledgeable than Fabrice. I see social media as medias, actually. And so they need to be held accountable as medias. And like during the presidential election in France, well, we had Le Canard Enchaîné, and they totally disrupt the campaign by outing François Fillon for all his money affairs.
Corruption.
Corruption, let's call it that way.
Yeah, that's the term.
And so, yeah, there is a media, the printed media, they don't even have an online version, and they totally changed the course of the election. And they are held accountable as media, their journalists have an ethic, etc. So social media, as a media, should basically be held accountable for the content that is on their platform. I think that's the way to go, rather than dismantling a company that actually works and that actually provides value. But they need to, acknowledge their role and acknowledge the fact that they're a media, that they're influencing society, and that they just cannot say, okay, we're not responsible for the content that some people, we don't know who, we don't want to know who, are putting on our platform.
I used to run a fashion business, and we were advertising on Facebook. And every time there was a little bit too much flesh, and I assure you there wasn't much flesh there, the ads got blocked. So Facebook knows how to do it. We need to have the same for political advertising. We need to set rules, and we need to help them define the policy so that we don't have any more fake news on them.
All right, I wanted your reaction, Marie-Barbe Girard, to what happened 2 weeks ago. The founder of Twitter announcing on his social media site he would no longer run political advertisements. Jack Dorsey tweeting the following: "This isn't about free expression. This is about paying for reach, and paying to increase the reach of political speech has significant ramifications that today's democratic infrastructure may not be prepared to handle. It's worth stepping back in order to address." Now, he's prodding regulators in the United States. That's not going to happen before the elections, is it? Over there. Is it going to happen here? And does it have to happen on a country-by-country basis? Or can the European Union do it?
I hope it would be better to have.
Because
it
we
at
have
the
different
European level.
electoral laws in every country of the European Union.
Yes, which makes it a bit more challenging. So if it has to be country by country, let's do it country by country. But if we can do it at European level, I think all the better.
What was your reaction to Jack Dorsey's decision at Twitter there, Fabrice Epelmoy?
Twitter's political ad is roughly 0.5% of what they make selling ads. It's the same for Facebook. So definitely, it's not a major financial deal for them, and it's an easy decision for Twitter not to take any political ad. It should be the same for Facebook, but Facebook definitely doesn't want to stop political ad, although it's not that much money, to be honest, compared to fashion industry or other industries. So there's definitely Facebook willing to have a political role. That's definitely a sign. So Facebook is being something like a political actor, just like a country. Let's take this into account, because as a country or as a continent, if we're talking about Europe, we don't have the power to dismantle Facebook. But we're facing something that is similar in terms of power to a country, and definitely isn't on our side.
Mathieu Noy?
Yeah, I don't know if to continue my media analogy. You've got a media, they've got like an editorial line. They don't want to show too much skin, so they just delete things. And then, well, they have their own agenda, indeed. I don't know, in France, political advertisement on TV or in the newspaper is basically forbidden. In the US, it's commonplace. You see a commercial about, I don't know, a car, and then you see a commercial about, on TV, on national television, you see a commercial about, I don't know, Hillary Clinton's campaign. In France, it's forbidden, but it doesn't apply on social media because, well, there is no rules, basically. We cannot regulate those. And if we consider those companies as media, well, we can apply the same rules that are applied to journals, to newspapers, to television shows. And for me, that kind of solves the problem.
And you need to let the audience regulate it as well. I came across an anti-Semitic message recently on Facebook. I notified Facebook. Took them a few days to get back to me, but they didn't take it down.
They did not take it
They
down.
did not take it down, so I
That's
went
free
back.
speech in terms of First Amendment. That's free speech. I mean, in the United States, you can be part of the Ku Klux Klan. That's legal. The French free speech regulation is extremely restrictive from an American point of view. So, I mean, from an American point of view, France is the #1 country in terms of censorship. We're ahead of Turkey. We are the world's most censorship country for social media. So, of course, France is a problematic country for a social media company, a very problematic country. And they see our country as not very friendly to free speech. And then I should give you some explanation about what is a political ad on Facebook. It doesn't have to be vote for this candidate. It could be me targeting you and only you with some specific piece of information that will change your view of the world. Because, well, let's face it, half of the population informs themselves using social media only. So if I can target one specific user and, for example, give him every day some news to be fed on for example, the environment, and I'm going to give him bad news for the environment every day, I will have an impact on his opinion. That's politics. I'm not doing any political ad by itself. I'm just pushing some editorial content to one specific user because I'm able to analyze that this guy potentially will change his opinion if I push this kind of content.
And that's the thing about globalization, right? Because it's true. For instance, in France and in Germany, there are strict laws against Holocaust denial. If, as Fabrice says, we have Facebook, which plays by U.S. First Amendment of the Constitution, right to free speech rules, those rules supersede the ones we have here, right?
I think we can navigate a broad consensus between European countries, right? It's worth mentioning, so the UK, to continue the press example, the UK has a pretty good independent press regulator. You can't really get away with that much in UK national newspapers. And we did that in response to things like, big misinformation crises, but also problems with invasion of people's privacy. And what was really striking is even though that review was done kind of 5 or 6 years ago now, it had almost no purview or even kind of view on social media as a media form. And I think that's just because we hadn't caught up. And now if we were going to undertake the same review, I'm sure that social media would probably be the main kind of thing we were looking at.
Is that a call for that to happen?
Totally, completely a call for it. And I think what we did see, which no one would want to see, is real unacceptable levels of misinformation during kind of almost every significant referendum or election we've had. And any broad European consensus would want to remove that or regulate that. Of course it would.
So the future's unwritten. Things could get better.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Johnny. Let me ask you this. GovTech is you bring together the private sector and the public sector, right? Which in France we're very much at ease of doing ever since the days where Colbert was Louis XIV's prime minister. Is it different when you go to the United States?
No, I think they have a pretty similar attitude. Again, what we're trying to do really is just, as Multi is trying to do, we're trying to take innovators who have startups and who have great ideas and trying to improve people's lives. I think one of the kind of great shames of technology is so far all the massive technology revolutions have allowed us to, update our Facebook profiles better or deliver a pizza to our houses quicker or connect with a hotel quicker. But the most important things like our health and our policing and our transport just haven't caught up. So what we're trying to do is take that same energy, take that same approach, take those same skills and apply them to the most fundamental societal problems.
So we've been talking about the United States most of the hour, Marie-Barbe Girard. If we'd had this conversation a few months back and Fabrice was here to talk about it with us, we would have been talking about China more, especially with 5G technology raising questions of national security. What's changed since last year?
Has much changed? I'm not sure.
In terms of 5G, nothing.
No.
You can either be listened at by the Chinese or by the Americans. Who are the most dangerous? That's a tricky question.
Yeah, because in China, all data is public. In the US, it's all privatized. I think we need to set our middle way and define exactly how we want data to be handled. And this is...
And 5G is one of those areas. Didn't we all have a potential giant of our own with Samsung and Nokia? And I'm sorry, what am I saying?
Nokia.
With Nokia.
It's been sold to Microsoft. Obviously, the way to do a startup in France is to build a great company and sell it to the Americans.
Which is one thing that we saw with all the companies, the GovTech companies that we talked to for that report, is that a lot of them are getting funding from the US because that's where funding is, and B, they have a strong interest in GovTech and in tech solving, helping modernize our public services. And that's one of the recommendations that we're making is that the French state should be investing more into GovTech.
Because the money's not in the private sector, it's going to have to come from governments?
Well, we want it to come from the private sector as well, but the truth is private investors today are a bit reluctant to invest in GovTech companies. Obviously, you've got companies that serve both the private sector and the public sector, like Doctolib, and these don't have any problems raising money.
Why? Is it cultural? Is it there a risk aversion that we have here more than in America?
I think there's a little bit of risk aversion. We'll hear things like, oh, it's slow, public sector is really slow, it's going to take ages. You can't really build a business model on selling to government. But I think the truth is that you have two worlds that don't speak to each other. You've got the private, investment world, and then you've got the public sector, and they don't know each other because
even now,
and this is what today was about. We brought them together, and we had a discussion. And there's a big trend for tech for good, and everyone wants to have an impact. Well, I think the first impact you can have is improve our public services. And do better with the same amount of money or even less and do more and help our citizens throughout the country.
Marie-Barbe Girard, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Johnny Hugo for being with us, as well as Mathieu Noé, Fabrice Epelboin. Thank you for joining us here for the special edition of the France 24 debate.